there last time too in the audience. I need a new topic. I need a new topic. What
Right.
is the
What
most
could it
exciting
be?
thing that happened to everyone this week? I'll tell you my
Yeah.
story.
Okay.
I was at Empowering Auto yesterday, and it's a big conference that promotes diversity in auto, and particularly focusing on promoting women leaders, right?
Mhm.
And there was this amazing panel. Our friend Angela Payne was
Yeah.
hosting it.
Oh,
If anyone knows
good.
Angela on the
Yes.
call,
She's
on the
excellent.
in the session, and
Yeah.
so she had this woman who got up, and she was in the audience, or
Mhm.
sorry, on the panel. Her name's Katie Phelp. And so I looked at her and I thought, oh my gosh, she has got the look that I'm trying to achieve. Well, lo and behold, I'm obviously achieving that look because for the rest of the day, people were coming up to me telling me what an amazing job I did on the panel.
Oh,
So
good.
I met my doppelganger, and I got credit for her brilliance all day long,
Oh
which
my
was
gosh.
amazing.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
hilarious. It
Yeah.
wasn't
So
even you.
pardon me.
It wasn't even you.
It wasn't even me, but fortunately, and even one point I was standing right next to her and someone came up to me and I was like, wow. So I have a post about it tomorrow on LinkedIn.
That's funny.
Yeah, it was very funny. So if anyone else has had anything fun happen this week, let us know in the chat. Any good accomplishments you've made? I know it's a big question for the beginning of a webinar. Feel free to
Yeah,
message me about it later if that's easier. The
that's
weather's an
hilarious.
easier topic.
Well, I went, anybody who knows me knows we're a big baseball family.
Oh,
And
right.
we went to the Jays playoff game
Woo!
on Sunday, and that was pretty electric. The environment
Yeah.
was electric.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
amazing. I
apologize if
bet. I
anybody's
bet.
dialing in from New York, I apologize, but go Jays.
Well, we have to win some of the time,
We
right,
have to,
Sherry?
yeah, exactly. It's hard to be a Toronto sports fan.
Okay, well, I want to be mindful of everyone's time, and it is 1 o'clock, so we'll get started. I want to thank you all so much for coming. This is a topic you're going to see that Sherry and I are pretty passionate about as we talk through. And, in the chat, we always love when you share your ideas and expertise as well. So we're going to talk through some questions that have been percolating for us. We have perspectives on them, but we know you do as well. So we're excited to hear from you too, and I'll keep my eye on the chat. I know I'm always trying to do a million things
I'll do that
when
too.
we're on these. Yeah.
I'll help you.
Thank you, Sherry. You're very good. You remember when you had to make the chat actually work for us a few times. So, for anyone who, I wanted to make sure you know that the session is being recorded. I always get asked that. The session is being recorded, so you will get the recording afterwards. Not right after, but within a week or so. Although it might be slightly delayed because we do have Thanksgiving here in Canada, so I may not get to you as quickly, but I promise it will be with you next week.
Mhm.
So for those of you who don't know me and First 30, I would encourage you to stop overpaying for outplacement and career transition services because First 30 is here. We always put up all of our pricing everywhere because we are consistent and transparent with our pricing. But as I always say, and those of you who have come to these sessions before, I apologize if you're hearing it again, but please don't work with us because we have the best pricing. We also have really great services. And we are a women business enterprise. So it's a WEB certified business as well. So if you have diversity objectives, we'll share a certification with you so you can add that
Mhm.
to your files. We've, of course, launched our employee onboarding course. So if you're interested in that, you can reach out to me. I don't have anyone sharing links in the chat today, but I'm happy to share. We are offering lesson one for free. So if employee onboarding is on your radar, this might be a really great way to get some guidance on how to work through each step of rebuilding your program. And I wanted to give Sherry Engel, you may know her. We do a lot of work together and we've run a lot of these sessions together, but I wanted Sherry, hello. I wanted to give you a chance
Hello.
to introduce yourself as well.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, I'm Sherry. I work in the HR consulting space, and at Loft Consulting, we actually do two different things. We help provide outplaced or fractional HR support for small businesses. And we also work with companies with HR teams, larger organizations that need help in areas where maybe it just takes a little bit more objectivity. So things like succession planning or engagement surveys, and or where you don't have capacity to take on some of the projects or initiatives that you are hopeful to achieve. So that's us.
And I've had the pleasure of working with you, and I've actually asked you to come in and work on some of the projects that I've had because you're amazing. And
Thank
you always get the best reviews on your work, and you've thankfully sent some clients my way, which I appreciate as
you.
well. But Sherry and I are looking to collaborate more and more as time goes on because we really admire what each other do. So
Exactly.
I'm very glad to have you here. So
Thank
I
you.
first wanted to start about a little, and maybe you can share as well. I know I just saw Maggie there in the chat, my friend from Florida. And so, Maggie, I know you probably have a very good perspective on this as well. But why I started getting passionate about this, and I'm sure that you know some people or you've been in a culture that you might describe as a gotcha culture, right? Where you don't have that feeling of psychological safety. It's like everyone's looking for you to make a mistake and
Yeah.
point it out rather than for you to succeed. And I worked in a few of those environments over time, and I found it demoralizing,
Hmm.
isolating,
Hmm.
and really difficult to do my best work. And if you've ever left an organization like that and moved to a culture that's healthy, you've realized how much better everything, like how much better you perform and how much nicer an environment it is to be. I'm not doing the best job at articulating it. It's a really hard thing. It's more of
Yeah,
a feeling than
it
it is
is.
something you can even express, right? Sherry,
It's
like that feeling of feeling relaxed and confident in your
yeah,
workplace.
yeah. And it's interesting when you're saying this, I'm also even just thinking about sort of traditional HR policies as an example. And a lot of the times, well, in the olden days, when I first started in HR, policies were very much
Oops,
gotcha
sorry.
based. It was
Yeah.
very gotcha based and it was very punitively focused. And now we want to be thinking about it in terms of how do we reinforce the behaviors and how do we articulate the culture of the organization that we want to have. And if a policy is written punitively or gotcha, then it doesn't reinforce that. So it starts every single fundamental piece within HR has a little bit of a role to play in setting the tone.
And it just reverberates through the organization, either in either direction. And I remember being in organizations where so and so threw so and so under the bus
Mm-hmm.
was said almost every day. And it was a
Mm-hmm.
constant reminder of the culture I was in. Whereas when
Mm-hmm.
you're in an environment where people are promoting each other, you're hearing all of these wonderful things being said about your colleagues, about the work that's happening. It's
Yep.
never going to be perfect, but
No.
at least it's coming through in all of the language that people use. So,
Yeah.
and we talk a lot. The other thing I was going to say is, and I know that a lot of people have been in this situation. I hear about this all the time, is being in a workplace where there's really very toxic leaders or colleagues. And what I love about the praise culture the idea of it, and bringing it to life is that it doesn't house toxic people very easily. Like
No,
their
exactly.
behavior will stand out so much.
Yes.
They might actually self-select to leave the organization. So I just
Yeah.
love it for so many reasons. So I thought it might be nice to hear why we were so passionate about this topic. But when I was, much younger, as Sherry said, back in the olden
In the
days,
old days, yeah.
yeah, I worked at a restaurant called Earl's in Alberta. And my manager there said that when I started, said to me, Amy, I'm going to be following you around for your first month. And I was like, ew, that kind of freaked me out. But then he said, well, I'm going to do that so I can tell you everything you're doing right.
Mm,
And I thought, wow, what,
yeah.
like, is he really going to do this? And sure enough, he did. And I'll tell you the impact it had on me. I don't know many 18-year-olds that are excited about going into a restaurant to waitress for, 5 hours, that I would literally be skipping into work. I couldn't wait to get there. And I really tried so hard to go over and above just because I knew that it was going to be recognized. We all love to be praised. Like anyone raising
Yeah.
children knows how
Yes.
much they respond to praise, right? And so it was really through that. I mean, he gave me constructive criticism too. And
Sure.
I think, yeah, and Sherry, you and I have confronted this in other talks we've given on the subject where it's like, well, it can't all be,
Hmm.
sunshine and rainbows. Well, of course
Hmm.
not. But he did give me constructive criticism, but it
Hmm.
landed. It was a soft
Yes.
landing that I got, right? And so I felt really good about all of the feedback I was getting. And I looked really hard for ways that I could do better. So that's
Hmm.
obviously stuck with me. It's stuck with me for the last million years. So, so that's another reason that I got excited about it. But one of the things that I've realized, and I'm sure a lot of people here today have realized, is that it's not enough to say, oh, let's do this goodwill thing.
Hmm.
We need to know what the ROI is and we need to build the case through the data. So I'm pleased to say we have collected some data. I'm going to send this out to you as well right after this session this afternoon. So don't worry about having to note it all down
Hmm.
because you will get it. But employees who feel unappreciated are 2 times more likely to leave the organization.
Yeah.
And that's through research. And by the way, I realize now that I haven't sourced it here, but it is
Yes.
sourced
In your
in
handouts.
what I'm sending in the handouts. It will be sourced. I'm sorry, got very lazy this week. Uh,
Well, that was me,
so
Amy. That was my stat. I'm just kidding.
yeah, right. You were very good. You did send through
Yeah.
the sources. So it's really important to recognize this because there's a cost to people quitting, which we're going to look at in a second. And then only 1 in 3 say they have received recognition in the last 7 days. And
Mm-hmm.
interestingly, those who did are almost 5 times more engaged than
Yeah.
those who have not received recognition. So more engaged employees are going to be more resourceful. They're going to be more proactive, right?
Hmm.
So it's going to benefit the organization.
That 7 days is something that's been around for a long time, actually.
Yeah.
That's sort of the standard once every 7 days. And if you think about it, that doesn't really feel like a lot, does
No,
it? Like
doesn't.
only
Yeah.
once a week that you need to be recognized. So it's A, it doesn't feel like a lot, and B, then it makes it achievable. So
Absolutely, it does. So if you're in a work environment, you say to yourself, okay, or if you have a team, you're like, I'm going to make sure to somehow, it doesn't have to be the same way every time. And the other thing that's really important we're going to talk about is like
yeah,
how certain recognition lands better than others. So
right.
we're going to talk about that as well. And then 79% of employees quit because they don't feel appreciated. And I don't think we hear this in the exit interviews, right? People are embarrassed. I would be embarrassed to
Mhm.
say, hey, I just didn't feel recognized or appreciated. Instead, if people say they're leaving, they'll say, oh, I'm getting more money. This
Money, yeah.
opportunity just landed in my lap.
Hmm.
But they're not telling you this, but they will say this in a
Hmm.
survey, right? Or
Right.
in research, they'll talk about this. And high recognition cultures are 3 times more likely to have engaged employees and see 31% less lower turnover,
Hmm.
which is really important. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But 69% say they would work harder if they
Yeah.
were better recognized, right? Last session, we talked a lot about mental health, and I'm not saying this is a solution to mental health. However, I do think that working in a more positive environment
Mhm.
does really help people who I can't remember the stat now, and I talked about it last time. So if anyone remembers it, tell me. But there was just so much absenteeism each week
Yes.
due to mental health
Hmm.
issues. And
Hmm.
sometimes our mental health issues we need to see a mental health professional and they're
Hmm.
quite serious, but others are maybe are just more about burnout. And if you were
Hmm.
recognized, maybe you could actually see less absenteeism and
Hmm.
what I learned last time, presenteeism, where
Yeah,
people show up, but they're not really there, right?
right.
And then, as I said, I should have put this earlier, but it's very expensive to replace employees. And whenever I bring up the stat, I'm very careful to say that this is a believable percentage, 30 to 50% of someone's salary. Sometimes it's a lot more than that to replace
Yes,
someone. I just think this is believable. So if
I
I'm thinking
agree.
of talking, yeah, to a CFO, I want to, even though sometimes I'm like, actually, it's higher, I
Yeah,
want to say this stat because
yeah.
it is believable.
Well, I mean, we've seen stats that say 2, 2.5. I saw a stat that said 10 times. And
Yeah.
it really does depend on sort of the internal and external impacts of the role, financial impacts. But I agree with you. This is the low end, but it's believable. And there's no doubt that it costs that much. There would be no doubt.
One thing that I always try to encourage people to do is like HR to do is to try to find to make a point of tracking the turnover numbers, which I know are there somewhere,
Hmm.
but also putting a hard cost to the turnover. So take the number of people that are leaving in a year, then take their average salary, times it by 30 or 50% or 40% to put it in the
Hmm.
middle, and then show that number
Hmm.
to your leadership or your colleagues and say, hey, we need to address this because this is how much we're losing. What are some of the ways that we can reduce turnover, and potentially building praise into your culture is one way to do that.
Hmm.
So I guess the question as we're talking about, key KPIs, if recognition is this powerful, why isn't it tracked like other KPIs? I don't know. Sherry, I know you have thoughts on
Hmm.
this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that it feels intangible. So it people are unsure of how to actually track it. And you mentioned a couple of stats that HR people typically do track, like turnover, absenteeism. We track to a certain degree engagement levels through engagement surveys and things like that. And you would sort of assume that increased praise would have a positive effect on those statistics. So you can
Hmm.
really say that. I think in terms of, direct measurement opportunities, you actually said one, which was exit interview feedback. And you're right. I don't know that somebody would just come out and say, "Oh, I didn't feel appreciated enough." But you could ask a direct question within the exit interviews to ask about the level of recognition or the feeling of appreciation. Sometimes we have it in employee engagement surveys and pulse surveys, questions. I receive recognition at work at least once a week. So you get input that way. There's other surveys like 360s, when you're evaluating leadership capability, are they actually recognizing their teams? So from a direct perspective, it's maybe, out in, right? Like you have to ask for it, but there are ways to measure. And I would say that there's other statistics that you already do measure more than likely within your organization that are correlated to this as well.
And one thing that I would be careful of, and Sherry and I have done some employee surveys together before, so we've talked this through with each
Mhm.
other. But you'll notice on your engagement survey, if you ask a question about receiving recognition, it's
Mhm.
often low. And
Yeah.
then giving recognition is very high. And
Hi.
you're like, how could everyone in the
Hmm.
organization have a very low perception of receiving recognition, but a very high perception of giving recognition?
Yes.
The problem is there's like a bias built into those questions because we're really good at rating ourselves very highly. So we're like, oh, yes, I'm always giving praise to others or
Yes.
recognizing their great work. So I would say that if you have those types of questions in your engagement survey, just be cautious how to interpret something where it's someone saying that they're doing something that might be perceived as a good thing to be doing.
You know what is important about that too, Amy, is is whether or not the recognition that you think you're giving is perceived to be recognition. So it's also
Mm,
how we provide it. And we've got some tips on that later in this presentation as well. I think that's equally important. If we're saying, hey, you did a great job, it feels like nothing. Whereas
yeah.
if you give more sort of valuable recognition and praise, it lands a little differently. But I'll
Yeah.
save that for when we get there.
Okay. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit now, Sherry. You're going to talk a little bit about the
Yeah.
impact of pay versus praise.
Praise. Yes. And when we think about it in terms of pay, a lot of the time people think that pay satisfies specific needs, and it does. Pay obviously does satisfy specific needs. But this is a graphic that I've always really liked, and this is based on the hierarchy of needs. And so if you look at that line between the top is motivation and the bottom is demotivation, if we think about it under that line, it's, oh, I can't even see it. I'm sorry. Physiological and then safety.
Yes.
So when we see below that line, we are looking at it in terms of demotivators. So what that means is if the baseline expectations are not present, then it actually becomes a demotivator. So if my work environment is not safe, if my physiological needs are not being met, if in this case, I would put pay in that category. If my baseline pay expectations are not being met, I am demotivated. Whereas when we go above the line, we're looking at it in terms of motivation. So this level of belonging through to self-actualization, that's where I start to be motivated versus demotivated. And that's really, in my opinion, where praise comes in, because recognition and praise happens above that line. So base pay, safety, things like that, they are potentials for demotivation, whereas praise and recognition are potentials for motivation.
Yeah. It's so interesting when you look at it this way. It kind of brings it to life because we're all familiar with this,
Mm-hmm.
right? On some level. But yeah, it's really interesting. Okay, so you have some other reference
Yeah, there's
points.
there's some other things that I think about when I think about it in terms of sort of the um, I guess the psychology of of praise. And you mentioned this right at the top, Amy, about psychological safety. And when we
Hmm.
think about it, psychological safety is really about having the safety or feeling safe to take risks at work, interpersonal risks at work. So speak up, share ideas, ask questions, admit mistakes without fear, without embarrassment. We can speak up and do that. And the impact really is that people are more motivated to um, look at innovation or problem solve in a different way. There's lots of impacts that psychological safety has. And why that's important when we're talking about praise is because praise reinforces trust and inclusion. And like you said, when you were going through and training and your manager was following you around to say what you're doing well, you were more open to receiving constructive feedback because the tone was set that it was a safe place,
Hmm.
right?
It really was. Yes. Yeah. And I've received criticism in both types of places. One which
Yes.
I would have described as gotcha, and that one, and others that were very I felt psychologically safe. And
Hmm.
I totally was so much more open. Like I
Hmm.
leaned into the criticism because I
Hmm.
knew that it was coming from a place of support rather
Hmm.
than a place of competitiveness or a
Right.
place of, yeah.
Yeah, it's like the psychological safety really allows us to take risks that we wouldn't otherwise do. And
Hmm.
ultimately, it it there's so many studies around this. It leads
Hmm.
to better performance, better
Hmm.
innovation, better, problem solving, et cetera, which I've already said. So,
Yeah.
uh,
One of the ways that I can tell what kind of environment I am in, of course, there's lots of signs, but is like I would physically feel better or
Mm,
worse in one workplace or another.
mm.
And I really noticed that. And yeah, it was amazing to me that it showed up in every way about how I felt, but also like how I felt emotionally, but also how I felt physically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the that is really true and
Yeah,
really important.
and when we were talking about absenteeism, people needing sick leave, like that can all contribute to people taking time off because you're going to need more time off if you're not feeling well, right?
Yeah.
You'll be calling in sick more often.
Well, and speaking of this link, between the physical and the psychological, there is actual neuroscience of recognition. And when people are recognized, it activates dopamine. And dopamine is the pleasure or the reward part of our brain, right? It's like when we get a like on a social media post and things like that, it's dopamine, a dopamine fix. And it also activates oxytocin, which is the connection or the trust chemical within the brain. And
Mm-hmm.
so, again, when we think about it this way, we want to think about it in terms of how this, how praise can literally rewire our brain, right? It helps
Mm-hmm.
us or it motivates us to seek more of the recognized behavior because we want those chemical um, fixes, for lack
That's
of a
actually
better
that's
word.
so amazing. It was interesting you bring up trust because I was listening to one of these panels yesterday when I was at this conference and they were talking about how trust takes so long to build
Yeah.
and it can only take a moment to break, which is a bit
Yes.
scary. But when you have it's really important to have a culture of trust, and especially in this very highly competitive world we're living in. We really need our top talent to be doing their very best job. And this
Mm-hmm.
is one of the things like we've
Yes.
been hearing, like I've obviously been hearing a lot about layoffs, and the data says that about 58% of organizations are considering layoffs
Wow.
in Q4 and into 2026. Whether those happen or not, it's just some are considering because it's a crazy world. What can we say
Yes.
right now?
Yes.
So, it's one of these. I think that employers can become, you and I have talked about this a lot, Cherry, can become complacent in an
Yeah.
environment where it's an employer's market. Well, here's the problem. If we can't afford to have as many employees and we actually need more than what we have, I know that people will say, oh, AI, blah, 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 but you need
Mm-hmm.
people still to operate. Someone
Mm-hmm.
has to push the buttons on the machine, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we need the few people we have being as productive as possible. So it's really not a time to step back
Yeah.
from being employee focused. It's a
Right.
time to step forward. And I look at 2020 when it was a similar situation
Yep.
and there was all this job loss and it was an employer's market and people didn't feel treated well. And sometimes it was just because companies had to lay people off. I understand that
Mm-hmm.
people's feelings were understandably hurt, but that's just the way it was. And then 2021, all of a sudden there was this urgency and everyone was hiring and it suddenly flipped to being an employees market and
Yep.
everyone's quitting and like wouldn't you just rather as an organization have the stability like and know that even in the best of times your best employees are going to choose to stay with your
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah. Trust. I love that you brought that up around this panel and this concept of trust. One of my favorite quotes is the only way you know if you can trust someone is to trust them. It's a leap of faith kind of an emotion, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it's true. And all that we're talking about is what's actually designing the environment for trust. So if we don't know if we can trust you, like you said, it's a feeling, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I can trust you because of these things that are being put in place or this environment that's created, I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
trust more easily. I'm going to trust more readily. So,
Mm-hmm. And I do believe that consistency of behavior really helps that. I remember
yes.
working for an employer and I told them in my interview, because it was a small company, I said, I really need I don't do well in gray behavior, right? Like
Mhm.
I need you to I thrive in an environment where it's black or white, right? Like I'm pretty consistent and I like when other people, of course, they spent the year I worked there being in the gray area.
Yes.
But so it was a but I'm glad I recognize that about myself, but I don't
Mhm.
think it's unique to me. I think
No, I don't either.
we don't like people to behave unpredictably. It's
Right.
uncomfortable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a boss once where it was like, I don't know how name is going to show up today, and it was like it was literally like walking on eggshells. And talk about a lack of psychological safety. It was not a very nice place to be.
I
And
can
not because
imagine.
they were always bad. It's
Yeah.
because it was unpredictable, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oops. There we go.
Oh, and then this is another, just one more theory that I think helps to sort of articulate the messaging around praise and why praise is so important. It's the social exchange theory. So what this is all rooted in is that relationships are built around reciprocal exchanges, and that when a person provides something valuable, the person receiving that something valuable feels obligated to return it and or pay it forward. And so
Hmm.
it's like praise breeds praise, recognition breeds recognition, recognition breeds good performance breeds good performance, essentially. And so it's all about, showing up how you want others to show up, because that's inherently built into how humans want to behave.
And one of the most wonderful things about praise, it's in abundance, right?
Yes.
We don't do well in
Yes.
an environment of scarcity, but
Yes.
we might not always have a ton of money to pay people, but praise, as we were saying when I was
Uh-huh.
promoting the session, it's free.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
sometimes the programs we have to set up to get it going are not free, but it doesn't cost anything to say thank you to someone and to recognize their great work.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And when you think about it in terms of that whole pay versus praise piece, like I actually worked for an organization where our compensation philosophy was to pay below market. Now, on a
Mhm.
base salary, on a total compensation perspective, it was to lead market. But the base pay, the philosophy was to lag market, which I think very
Mhm.
few organizations would admit to, but it
Mhm.
was the reality of how the business was structured and the margin and whatnot. However, there was so much intentionality around creating the type of environment that we're talking about, and the engagement levels and the retention levels of employees in that organization were so much higher than other organizations that I worked in, where the pay philosophy was higher and the actual base pays were significantly higher
Wow.
than market. So it
Yeah.
just shows you that it's so important.
And it also shows you that what we were talking about at the beginning is accurate, that people in an exit
Mhm.
interview will say, "Oh, I'm going to be making more money."
Mhm.
But money wasn't
Mhm.
the motivator to leave.
No. No,
Maybe
exactly.
money was a bonus,
Right.
but you've just kind of proven that point. I think that point is proven time and again. The data
Yeah.
shows us that.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking a lot about bosses, so we were.
Yeah.
So thinking about your best boss, was it their ability to pay you or ability to recognize you that made a bigger difference? I mean, I know my answer to that question. Of
Mhm.
course, there's a standard. You have to be paid a standard, but
Yeah, it's that
be,
demotivation versus motivation.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely it is. Um, but I also think it will be really important when we get to talking about what praise is meaningful.
Mhm.
That also does make a big difference. So we're going to talk about that, I think, in this section, how we can make praise a habit.
Yes. So when I think about it in terms of praise, and you said this, you said that there's something about the consistency, right? The predictability. And there is something really important. And when we were talking about the surveys and people feel that they praise more than the praise that they receive, I really think that part of it comes down to our biases, of course, like you said, and part of it also comes down to how are we praising. And so when I think about the culture that was created in the organization where, praise trumped pay in that situation, and the pay rates were not market, but the retention and engagement were significantly higher. There was a ton of intentionality around how to recognize. And so I think one of the top things that HR people can do from a lead by example perspective and from a teach is to help managers be better at giving meaningful feedback. And
Yeah.
this is, I mean, I know there's lots of different feedback formulas and things like that, but this is something that I really do believe in. That if you're giving somebody feedback, it has to be actionable. They have to understand it. It has to be actionable. It has to be rooted in something. And so I kind of think about it as a three-part formula. It's behavior plus example plus impact. And the behavior is really, what did the person do? The example is specifically calling out a situation where you saw them do it. And the impact is the why it matters. So, why is it important that they are doing this behavior, and what impact does it have either on their colleagues or the organization or a customer or financial impact, whatever it is? Tying it back to that, it really resonates with the person and it allows them to then take action in the future that is repeatable, right? They, they
Right.
they understand exactly what you mean. Good
Yeah.
job is nice, but it really doesn't go very far.
Right. Yeah. And I find like if I mean, there's ways to do this, and sometimes we have to do it electronically, but I use this
Yeah.
with my kids all the time. Right.
Oh
And I
yeah.
know you and I've talked about raising your kids. It's the same. I remember when they were little, I would like get down on my knees and I would, say to my daughter, thank you so much for helping your brother put on his jacket this morning. It
Mm-hmm.
actually meant that I had more time to da da da
Yeah.
da da. And, it really helped me get to work on time, which was very
Right.
important. And I appreciate it. And I'll tell you, those kids, they were looking all the time for that type of praise. And I tried, listen, I didn't do everything perfectly. I can tell you that right now. But
None of us
it's always
do.
nice to do that one or two things really
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But even to this day, if they walk the dog, I'll say to them, thank you. They do it quite often now, but I always try to make a point to thank them, tell them how it made a difference to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that way they're going to continue helping and hopefully they model that behavior. And
Mm-hmm.
Lovell's on the call. So, hey, Lovell.
Hi,
Thanks
Leva.
for joining. She mentioned that every manager has a manager too, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
more it can trickle down and it can have a greater impact. But I think you're so right, Sherry,
Mm-hmm.
about the role of HR as coach. And another way to have feedback is to make it part of a habit is to like, add it in a template for one-to-ones, right? What has
Yes.
the person like you don't have to put it on their template, but like what have they done right
Yep.
this week, right?
Yep.
Or the
Yep.
last 2 weeks.
You
What
can
do you
you can
think? I
add
have a
it.
question,
Yeah.
Sherry, and to anyone on the call, I'd love to hear is like does the number of people we manage have an impact? Because I always have a number in my head
Uh-huh.
of what I think is meaningful, but what about you? What do you think is the kind of like when is someone maxed out as a manager?
So I have a response to that.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to see everybody else's, and
Yeah.
you're not going to like my response because it's not concrete.
I just want to be clear about the
Yeah,
question if people want to
yeah,
answer it. So the
yeah.
question is, how many people should one manager
Have,
manage?
yeah,
Yeah,
as direct
under them.
reports.
So let's
Yeah,
give people a chance to answer because I
yeah.
see some
Okay,
answers coming up
okay.
here. Maggie has an answer. I don't know if anyone else does. People are like, Gosh, you guys, we're just trying to have our lunch. Well,
Yeah, don't make
stop
me
making us do work.
type. Don't make me
Yeah, it depends
type.
on the other responsibilities associated.
Yeah,
Maggie says should only be about 6 or 7 direct reports.
yeah.
So I think we've given people a fair amount of time. So
Okay.
what do you
I
think?
agree with the it depends. And the
Okay.
reason being, I think it depends on a number of factors.
Mm-hmm.
One of the factors is how complex the tasks or the duties of your direct reports are. One factor is how experienced is the manager, how experienced is the team. Another factor is, how closely in proximity do you actually work with the individuals? How specialized is the role? There's tons of things. But
Yeah.
but what's important about what you're saying is if if your workload as a manager is so high that you can't actually meaningfully manage, then the ratio is probably wrong. The ratio is
Okay. Yeah.
often broken.
Yeah.
There was another little piece of advice when I was doing some research for this, which was to look at the ratio of giving positive to constructive feedback 3 to 1. And so if you think about 3 to 1, you have to have enough time to do that too, right? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and to meaningfully observe, I keep saying meaningfully, but to actually be able to observe and be able to provide feedback in this way, I can't be so far away from my direct reports, or I can't have so many that I don't actually notice what they're doing.
Well, I am kind of in the Maggie Peters camp because
Yeah.
Maggie said 6 or 7, and I'm going to tell you why. It's because, yes, I think that there are people that are far more skilled at being managers, absolutely, and maybe it depends on the role and the type of
Mhm.
organization. However, in a world where people are looking, I think, for a more curated employee experience, let's call
Mhm.
it also gives a manager, say they have 7 reports versus 11, right? They get a chance to get to know each of those employees, what matters to them, right? It's just like how much capacity can you have? I personally, and this might just be Amy on an island, I really like in an office environment at least for a
Mhm.
manager to be able to meet one to one with each of their team members at least once every 2 weeks for 45 minutes, let's say,
Mhm.
to go through their projects, to go through anything that they need help with, any kind of things that they're, stumbling on, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, and to talk about their career, not every time, obviously, but some of the time. So I
Mhm.
just wonder how much capacity someone can have for all of that. So
Mhm.
for me, I just always have more. I'm not saying there's a right answer, but I just personally have
Mhm.
that in my mind because I'm
Mhm.
also thinking of myself as an employee.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I want to share my manager with 11 different people because I have aspirations and I also sometimes want help and I want to be able to meet with them and have their time. I also want them to know me. I want them to know that I have a dog named Riker and sometimes I'm going to have to leave work early to take care of him or take him to the vet or something.
Yes, I don't disagree with you that
Yeah.
that probably is the right for the types of jobs that you've held. I think
Yeah.
it's just thinking about other types of jobs
Yeah.
and how the ratio may, because it could be less than that too. It could be
Yeah.
1 to 2. It could be, it's yeah, it's a
Yeah, you're
little.
right. You're absolutely right. It
Mhm.
could be less. And Amber, sorry, if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly here, Amber, but he's saying that you could be a bottleneck too as a leader if you have too many, right? But there's so many opinions on this, and I think it's really important. Maybe each situation just needs to be assessed on it. And so there, we're back to it depends.
We're back to it depends, but your
Yeah.
experience is important, Amy, and
Yeah.
it's and I think there's truth to that in terms of the work environment that you've had, and more importantly, the things you called out that are important to you as an employee are very likely important to a lot of people as employees, and so we need to think that through when we're looking at org design and things like that, for
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's an interesting debate.
It is an interesting
Yeah,
debate because it's like, yeah, it's how much can someone handle, but as we're
yeah,
talking about, it's like, how am I going to feel, right?
yeah. Well, I
Um,
have a story. I mean, I was I was a manager from a very young age, actually, and I always, pat myself on the back. I thought I was a pretty good manager. However, there got to a point where it wasn't even the number of direct reports that became too big. It was actually my span of control and the responsibilities within my job that became too big, that they then ended up taking up so much time that I couldn't effectively manage.
hmm,
And that does not feel good when you actually care and take pride in how you lead. And
hmm,
so it's a lot of different factors that go into play. Do I have time to do the meaningful work that I need to do as a leader? And if I
hmm.
don't, then something's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? We're just like, when I'm thinking of it, I'm only talking about the management of others,
Yeah,
not really thinking even about the fact that someone's got a job to do on top of
right,
all of that.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, I think this slide was meant for me to tell a couple of little
Yes,
stories
because you
here.
had a
Okay,
CEO,
I
I think,
did.
who was,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, and so when we think about creating structures and tools around recognition, there were two stories that actually came to mind, and they are so simple, like ridiculously simple, but super effective. So I worked at a place where um, it was everybody was in office, and it was a spectacularly beautiful office with a
Oops.
giant lunchroom and whatnot. And it was also a high growth organization. And so, as the organization was growing, the president CEO was saying, I don't feel like I know people anymore. I don't feel like I connect with people. I don't feel like I don't feel like I know what they do or that I can actually give them praise and recognition. And so, he ended up building into his routine, like actually calendarizing time to walk around the office, say hi, ask questions, understand. So, if we talk about connecting this back to meaningful praise, if he didn't have a chance to do that, he wouldn't even, like he wouldn't know the people, he couldn't even give them praise, and B, it wouldn't be meaningful praise because he can't connect with who they are and what they do. And so this was something like he did it. He put it in his calendar, and he would start his days and he would walk around the office, and it was kind of like compartmentalized into quarters, so he'd spend Mondays in this quarter and Tuesdays in this quarter.
Were
And
people like, look busy. He's
yeah,
got
yeah. No, because it was a psychologically safe place to work.
right. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
But
no.
no, it was really good. And then the second piece, very similar, a little bit different. This was a leader who was a remote. Most of their team was actually decentral, like they were in a centralized spot, and most of their team worked in branch locations scattered across the country. And similarly, she would diarize time to write personalized thank you notes to people.
Mm.
And it got to the point where, like, the leaders below her would give her tips, like, so and so did this, or can you recognize so and so for that. And I think for her it was once a month that she personalized thank you cards
Hmm.
for team members within her region. So,
Wow. Yeah, and it's so nice to have ideas for remote
mhm.
workplaces where we can't just walk around, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to build on what your story about walking around, though, and it's not
Yeah.
exactly to do with praise, but since I
Mhm.
know we have an HR audience, I thought it was important to mention. When I worked in corporate, I'd work in quite a few large buildings, right? I worked for one small business, but mostly large. And I had my role was in two parts. I did market research, and then sometimes I would do employee research for the organization as well. And I was that person they handed their Gallup results to and would say, like, can
Mhm.
you help
Yeah.
us activate these in the organization? So
Mhm.
I felt a responsibility to understand the organization. It wasn't about me going giving people praise, but I think as HR, it's actually really good to get in a practice of calendarizing, just walking around
Yep.
your office if you're now, and just not having a plan. I would just go up to one floor or another and I would just
Mhm.
walk around and I'd see people, I'd learn about them. We weren't
Yep.
necessarily talking about work, but you'd be surprised how much you can learn about the organization, just by talking to people informally.
Yep.
And I'd always try to do it on a Friday at around 10:30 because I knew people were like in a good mood, they're wrapping things up, and they're more open to having a conversation with
Mm.
you. So I would give that piece of advice, whether it's for praise or whether it's just to take the pulse of your organization and learn more about it. It is so effective to
Yep.
do that.
Yeah.
And you'll feel good after.
Yeah, and I mean, interest. I'm trying to figure out how to do that with remote environments. I guess it's just picking up the phone if
Picking
people
up the
do
phone and
that.
giving people a call. You
Yeah,
and I do that with each other
yeah,
once in a
we do.
while,
We do a
right? And it's
lot.
rare not
Yeah,
to text and be like, "Are you free at da da da?"
yeah,
And we'll just once in a while like, "Hey, I just was in the
yeah.
car and I thought I'd call and check in and see how you're doing." And then we end up having a great talk. We
Mm-hmm.
often talk about work,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we don't.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a nice feeling and it creates a sense of community and connectedness. And
Mm-hmm.
we get opportunities from each other and what we're doing. So, it's really
Yeah.
just great. Yeah.
Well, and then it encourages employees to do the same back from an HR perspective. It
Yeah.
actually encourages them to pick up the phone and, hey, yeah, I just want to chat. Somebody
Yeah.
said to me, a client that I do a lot of work with, she said, "Oh, I miss our Friday afternoon chats." And it just happened that we kept scheduling Friday afternoons. We said, "Oh, well, let's just call each other on Friday afternoons." Like it's just, yeah, it's
Yeah.
true. You get a lot more information through these informal connection points.
Yeah. And sometimes it's like, I do think that our instinct now is to text or email things,
Mhm.
but it's nice to have that real connection with people and
Mhm.
actually have our brains respond to it quite differently than
Mhm.
text. Although I'm the type of person you could be texting me and then like try to call me while we're texting, and I'll be like, wait a second.
Yeah,
No,
I'm
no,
not
no,
into
I do not
that.
want to talk. Okay, let's just talk a little bit about praise gone wrong
Yes.
before we leave today.
So
So,
yeah, you
yeah,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
No, you go.
I thought this was a very funny quote.
Yeah,
Flattery is from the teeth out, sincere appreciation is from the heart out.
yeah, yeah,
And it's so true. And that's that again, it just goes back to that feeling. Did they mean this? Was this really important?
hmm,
How true is what they're saying? Is this like blowing smoke? you know,
yeah, yeah,
versus something that actually is going to resonate with me.
yeah. So, we're going to talk a little bit about what to avoid and what praise is not. And I just wanted to say that people have questioned me in the past about praise versus creating an environment of toxic positivity.
Mm,
And I really reject toxic positivity. Like, that is not an environment where I thrive in at all. Things can't always be good, right? Like what I was saying before, it
mhm.
can't always be sunshine and rainbows. We have to be able to be critical. That's part of creating a culture where people and organizations thrive, where we
Yeah.
say, okay, this isn't working. So it's
Yep.
certainly, I just wanted to make that clear that it's not about always being positive and having it be not okay or frowned upon to be critical as well.
Yeah, I think I think that's really important because again, that's what helps it resonate. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
So one, and you and I both agree on this. Well,
Yeah.
we both noted this one in the past is Employee of the Month programs. I think that their intent is really good. I
Yep.
do, but people do not get it. I've done, you and I have done some work like this together. But I'll go into organizations and run what I call our retention interventions
Yep.
and understand what's really going on with people, and they will bring this up that they don't like these programs because they're so far away from the moment. They don't understand why this person was recognized, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, Sherry.
Yeah, I'm just looking. Somebody made, I do agree with that. I think that what happens with the employee of the month is people question, when you have more questions than you do confirmation of the
Yeah.
choice, and then sometimes you feel forced to choose it, to
Hmm.
choose the person. But I'm just reading this comment here. One thing that worked really well was doing quick Friday wins on Teams. Everyone shares one colleague they'd like to recognize and why. Keeps the positive energy flowing and helps remote members feel seen and appreciated. That's it. That's a really good example.
As long as it's not the
Uh,
same employee being recognized.
every time,
That can
yeah,
happen too, right?
that's
But
true.
I do love that. I actually do love that one, Amber.
Um, the other thing to think about when it goes wrong is making it specific, right?
Yeah.
So making sure it's not too vague or not connected to outcomes. So going back to that formula, that feedback formula, I think is really helpful because then it's rooted in something and it doesn't just feel like, I don't know,
Hmm.
words,
Yeah.
you know?
And when you and I were presenting at the CPHR conference last year, I remember someone saying, my boss used to thank me for coming in every morning. And I'm
Yes,
like, and it just
that's
felt so
right.
insincere and like
Yeah.
such a, yeah, it was just, did not land well with her at all.
I forgot. You've got a
Yeah.
good memory. Yeah, I had forgotten
Sometimes.
about that, but that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't thank people or don't recognize base level expectations.
Right, exactly. And then we were just talking about the perceived
Yeah.
favoritism, recognizing, and that can be the danger of these employee of the
Yes.
months too.
Yeah.
I had an experience when I worked in an organization. It was a different restaurant, and my friend got written up and wowed. So we had like the two extremes of recognition that you can get in our business. He was written up for not remembering the soup of the day at a table where our GM was sitting. I know. And then later that day, he took an employee who had got dish soap in their eye in the kitchen, and was really bad. I guess it was quite toxic. And so he took him to the emergency. So he got wowed at the beginning of his shift, he got written up. At the end of his shift, he got wowed, where we
It's
all clapped for him. So
oh
that was
my
very
goodness.
confusing for everyone.
Yes. Um, this is actually a really, really toxic uh, example of to avoid is when it's weaponized. So when it's given to manipulate and not sincerely. So,
Yeah.
that's definitely something to avoid. I think people feel it. Like I think people know it, but definitely with all of our HR friends on the phone or on the phone on the call here today, if you see that, I would call it out because this
Yeah.
is dangerous.
Totally.
Oh, this is another, some people like to be recognized differently. There's
Yeah.
actually some people who really do not like public recognition or where it doesn't at all align. So like for example, you said, Amy, I want my boss to know me. I want my
Yeah.
boss to know who I am and what I do. So if they get you an I love cats poster,
What?
that ain't gonna cut it, you know?
I do love cats too, but not as much as
Okay,
I love
all
dogs.
right. Yeah, all right. Well, I didn't know that because I know you love dogs. Um, or for me, it's like, this is terrible, but I only drink lattes. I don't drink
Yes.
coffee. So if somebody came up and give me a coffee, I'd be like, oh, thanks. But so just making sure that we understand what's important to people and how they want to be recognized. Because recognizing somebody and appreciating somebody in the way that's meaningful to them is pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely it is.
Mhm. And now I'll get you an I Heart Cats t-shirt. So that's good.
I'll wear it with pride. I'll wear it with pride.
Uh,
It's funny you say that, and I'll just like it's even about being asked questions about like I have kids, I love my kids, but I don't love being asked about my kids. Like I just, I'd
mhm,
rather be asked like how's work going? I know that sounds awful,
mhm.
but if someone really knows you, they'll ask you like how is your business going? And I always say to my husband like I have these friends and they like never ask how is it obviously if you have your own business you're excited about it and it's
Yeah,
something you want to
yeah.
talk about and they never ever ask me about it and it's like oh I wish people would. I mean I'm not going to ask them to ask about that and of course I'm going to be but it's just like it's just knowing people, right?
Mhm. Well,
um
actually, just a little story that just came to mind when I was working for an organization and we did do an engagement survey and recognition came up as a gap, right? There just wasn't enough recognition. And when we were trying to figure out how to address it, brainstorming all the things, the CEO at the time said, well, we're not gonna we're not going to say, hey, you wanted us to thank you more, so now we're thanking you more. It's like me saying to my husband, I want you to say I love you more. And then when he starts saying I love you more, I'm going to say, well, you're just saying that because I told you to. Like it's
Yeah,
kind of the
yeah,
same thing. So that piece about I'm not going to ask you to ask me, but
yeah.
I'd like
No,
you to ask me.
yeah, yeah. I'm not going to ask you to ask me, but please ask me.
Ask me. Yeah.
um, Thank you, everyone. I can't believe we're at the end of the hour. This was such a nice conversation, and I really appreciate everyone's contributions. I want to let you know that Nina and I are creating a tradition now to run this employment law insights for the next year, every year at the end, towards the end of the year, because we want our HR community to know what to prepare for. I know we have some folks in the US. If you know great US unemployment lawyer, please put them in touch with me if they're really
Mhm.
good on these types of sessions. Nina is from Canada, so I wanted to throw that out there. After this session, I'm going to send you an email with all the stats we talked about. It will also include, I'm inviting you, if you want to talk to me about our outplacement program, I'm always happy to talk. Even if you just have questions, like
It's
you
a
don't even
great,
have a
yeah.
plan, but you just want to get prepared should the
That's
time ever
it.
come. Don't hesitate to chat, to book a time with me and we can talk about it. And what else and the invite to this. So you'll get the invite to this so you can register this afternoon if it's something that you're going to be interested in. And Sherry and I are both going to be at Disrupt HR in Kitchener
Yeah.
Waterloo. I'm hosting a panel there, so I hope to see some folks there if you're around. And I'm going to be at Workplace Law Talks on the same day. I'm also going to be on stage there, so I'll be making a brief appearance on and off, and Social HR Camp in Toronto. And I really need to check the dates on some things. I think I've overcommitted this fall, winter, so I might have to check. I'll be racing from place to place, but I hope to catch people in person as well. And I think that's it for us. And Sherry, you can find us both on LinkedIn. So if you're not connected with Sherry yet, and please feel free to connect with me if we're not connected as well.
Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Amy.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me back. I love our chat.
Oh my gosh, I would have you back anytime, anytime. And I'm just checking out the comments here because I know there was some comments. Oh, thanks everybody. I see some thank yous and coming up. I love that you can share these little emojis now. I
I
didn't realize you could do that.
know. I
For all the
know.
time I spend on these sessions, I
Yeah.
actually am not the best at using um, uh, I'm not the best at actually using this platform. I don't know why. I'm
I love
always
emojis.
forever having trouble driving. Oh, great. Thank you so much, everybody. I see all
Thanks,
your comments
everybody.
here and your little hearts and everything. So thanks so much for joining. And Cherry, as always, thank you. You're
Yes.
always
Thank
wonderful and
you. Always
I
awesome.
appreciate you. And I'm going to tell you more specifically why when we see each
Oh,
other next week.
okay. And I will do the same.
Okay. Bye,
Thanks, everybody.
everybody.
Take care.